Hello and welcome to my channel Polyglot Reading. My name is David and today I would like to introduce you to Natalia Ginzburg's novel All Our Yesterdays. Okay, so why of all books exactly this one? A book that was originally published in Italian as Tutti I nostri ieri more than 70 years ago in 1952. There are two reasons. First, simply because I love it. So secondly, because last week an important German periodical, Der Spiegel, just published a list of the 100 most important international novels of the past century. And this book made it into that list. And I'm very happy about this. And I will try to whet your appetite for the book with the following points. First, I will give you a brief overview of the plot. Then I will provide some arguments why it is worth reading the novel. Then I will tell you a little bit about what makes the book special. First, in the context of all the literary works of Natalia Ginzburg, but also in the broader context of the Italian post-war literature. And in the fourth chapter, I will talk about what is special about Natalia Ginzburg's writing style in this novel. And finally, so fifth chapter, what are Ginzburg's literary role models? Okay, let's start right with the beginning. Point one, the plot. I will start with a mixture of the blurbs that I found in the German and the English editions. Anna is a 16-year-old schoolgirl in a small town in northern Italy. She is the youngest of the family and no one takes her seriously. Neither her two older brothers, who shut themselves in the living room with friends to discuss politics, nor her sister Concertina, who only has all her numerous fiancés in mind. Even Signora Maria, the housekeeper, takes better care of the roses in the garden than she does of the girl. Only the somewhat big-mouthed neighbor boy, Juma, pays some attention to Anna. Together they go for walks, then they go to the Café Paris of Paris, and later they go to the shrubbery by the river. When suddenly one of the family friends is arrested, all the leaflets, the secret leaflets against Mussolini, have to be hastily burned in the fireplace. And there are other complications. Italy enters the war, and the older brother, a convinced pacifist, is to be drafted. And Anna's big sister, Concertina, falls in love with a fascist, and Anna suddenly becomes pregnant. And to save her reputation, Anna then marries an eccentric older family friend, Cenzo Rena, and together they move into his village in southern rural Italy. There in the countryside, they experience the realities of war, the German occupation, the air raids, the material hardships, the murderous racist frenzy of the fascists, a rural society dealing with anxiety and grief. And so, through the eyes of a young female protagonist, the novel looks at very existential experiences that have shaped an entire generation in Italy and in Europe. The air raids, village rumors, neighborhood quarrels, bombings, racism, discriminations. And the author provides a very broad panorama of urban and rural characters. It was really a realistic mixture of charity and ignorance and vice and virtue. And with all her clear-eyed wit, Natalia Ginzburg focuses on how to live a meaningful life with integrity under an oppressive or even criminal political system, and how we can manage to nurture hope and love and the love of life, a will for life, despite all the challenges and all the evil. So let's move on to my second point. Why is the novel worth reading? The novel is really great in enabling us to experience great history, but within the small personal events. It is a personally touching novel, always with an eye on the great social and societal challenges, but without ever drifting into the pathetic, the abstract, or the bombastic style and the hollow or nice sounding words. If I were to name the five most important points as to why the novel is worth reading, I would list the following ones. Number one, it's the author's ability to show the big events in the small events, the social and political world with its impact on the private life, in the personal fate of an individual. This makes it a great combination of personal history and the collective history of Italy or even world history. Second, it's the really realistic representation of the everyday life and everyday joys and hardships of ordinary people. And it's the number three, it's the avoidance of moral exaggeration and finger pointing and self-adulation of the Italian resistance. These are features that we do see in many other literary works of this period in the first decade after World War II. Um, Natalia Ginzburg's language is always very matter-of-factly, unsentimental, and yet emotionally gripping. And number four, a particular strength is the complex characterization of the female figures. We do not see that very often in the male-dominated literature of the post-war period. And number five, it's a credible portrayal of moral dilemmas and the ambivalence of most moral decisions that have to be made by ordinary people under extraordinary circumstances. Okay, number three. So why is the book an important one? First, in the context of the literary production of Natalia Ginzburg herself. So what makes it special, what makes it stand out among all her other literary works? First, this is her first full-length novel. She had previously published other pieces of prose, for example, La strada che va in città, so the street that leads into the city, or È stato così, that's how it was. But these were considerably shorter texts. And so this one, All Our Yesterdays, is her first full-fledged debut as a novelist, and a very successful one at that. It was winning the Swiss Charles Villon Prize in 1953. And as a novel about the fascist period in Italy, it's also a very credible, realistic, and convincing novel. Natalia Ginzburg, she knows exactly what she is writing about. After all, this was written just a few years after her own Jewish husband, Leone Ginzburg, who was also a member of the political resistance movement, after he was arrested by the German Gestapo and finally murdered after being severely tortured in prison. And so in this novel, Natalia Ginzburg processes her own experiences during the period of fascism and the World War II for the first time. And she finds the tone that will later become so characteristic of her writing, this unagitated, objective, almost laconic tone, the focus on individual personal experience and family themes and family relations that are reflecting and impacted by the larger political picture. And really, and this way, she is noticing like a seismograph how the great social and political events repeatedly impact private life and individual human destiny. And so, in fact, what makes this book special um, in compared to the Italian literature of its time? The Italian literature of the first decade after the end of World War II, so 1945 to 1955, this so-called Italian neo-realism. This is an extremely political literary movement that, among other things, focused a lot on establishing the glorification of the anti-fascist resistance as a central narrative and as a unifying factor for the new Italian Republic. And to put it bluntly, in 1945, large parts of the Italian society suddenly discovered that they had actually all been anti-fascists and resistance heroes or the previous decades. And so this somewhat complacent sense of moral superiority is also reflected sometimes in this neorealistic literature in a style that, from today's perspective, seems rather pompous and dramatic sometimes. So the 1940s and 50s novels of this time For example, novels by Elio Vittorini or Vasco Pratolini, and some of them are good examples of the style and attitude. Or even more so, in my view, the almost unbearable Carlo Cassola with his novel La ragazza di Bube. In English, it would be a Bube's girl. I fear that some of my Italian viewers will now perceive this as blasphemy, but I stand by my opinion. But also to emphasize the role and the particularity of and the greatness of Natalia Ginzburg as a writer, her sober and objective, matter-of-fact style really sets her apart from these authors and the rest of the literary production of these years. She also implicitly describes the consequences of fascist politics and fascist crimes, but without an exaggerated tone of accusation, without moralizing about her protagonists, and also without demonizing the political criminals. Although she would have had any reason to do so. Her husband had been murdered by them. So understatement and precise observations are the strength of Natalia Ginzburg. These are features which set her pleasantly apart from the neorealist pathos of the post-war years. Number 4, so what is special about Natalia Ginzburg's writing style? Yes, almost everything has been said already, but let me briefly summarize her particular strength. It's in precise description of private life, of personal destiny, and multifaceted characters. It's a moral message, but subtly packaged without moralizing undertones or any pathetic bluster. It is a focus on personal family relationships, on the everyday life as an important mirror for the major political and social tendency. And it's, last but not least, a decidedly female perspective in the otherwise very strongly male-dominated literature about the resistance against fascism and World War II in the first decade after the end of World War II. Fifth and final chapter of my video, what are the literary role models that can be recognized in Natalia Ginzburg's work? So I don't know whether she ever talked about this. This is just my personal impression. I may be wrong, but I think I can detect influences of at least 3 specific authors in her works. First, so I would mention Leo Tolstoy. He comes to my mind first. This intertwining of private destiny and the great political events and turmoil of war. I think Ginzburg learned a lot from Tolstoy's War and Peace. And after all, her husband, Leone Ginzburg, was a lecturer in Slavic studies and Russian literature at the University of Turin. So Russian classics like Tolstoy's War and Peace certainly played an important role in the Ginzburg family. She must have been familiar with it very, very deeply. Then I see some parallels to the French writer Gustave Flaubert, and in particular in the second part of the novel, where the life in rural Italy is described. I think from Flaubert's realism, especially in Madame Bovary, Ginzburg adopts the precise observation of everyday details and the representation of the province with all its particular social codes. So I think the descriptions of life in southern rural Italy, in the hometown of Anna's husband, this shows this detailed power of observation that was trained, I think, by reading Flaubert. And last but not least, Virginia Woolf. I see some similarity or some link with Virginia Woolf and her ability to grasp and to express subtle processes in the inner life of female characters, particularly in the description of the thoughts and emotion of the female protagonist, Anna. So let me be clear, Natalia Ginzburg is not using any of the more fancy experimental literary feature like a stream of consciousness that Virginia Woolf uses in her novel. She is more traditional in the way she is narrating the story, but I think this sensitivity for the subtle processes in the inner life of female characters, I think that this has been influenced by Virginia Woolf. Okay, that's it. I hope I've been able to raise your interest in this novel. Let me know what you think about it, whether you have already read it and whether you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching this video. Hope to see you next time. Until then, have a great reading time. Take care. Bye bye and ciao.